Good morning, happy Friday. It is this time that I really want to extend a warm welcome to Ms. Katie Potter, President and CEO of Five Star Senior Living, which is headquartered right nearby in Newton, Massachusetts. I also want to acknowledge that Katie is an alum of Boston University School of Law. As many of you know today, we do have this concentration that we are launching this year in our master's program in this sector. Five Star Senior Living is a senior living and rehabilitation and wellness services company. Five Star owns, operates, and manages senior living communities across the United States. Additionally, Ageility Physical Therapy Solutions, a division of Five Star, provides rehabilitation and wellness services within Five Star communities, as well as to external customers. Under Katie's leadership, Ageility has transformed into a growing fitness and lifestyle brand for older adults that is grounded in clinical excellence. Katie has been at Five Star Senior Living, it's already 12, first as Executive Vice President and General Counsel, and then recently in 2019 was appointed to President and CEO. We're also very, very honored because just recently, Katie has been appointed as a member of the Board of Advisors of the School of Hospitality Administration, for which we are truly humbled and honored, and also to help show our commitment to this sector. I'm now going to hand the conversation over to Dean of NAJA for what is the last of our Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series for this semester. More to come in the spring. Look out for those announcements soon. And without further ado, Dean of NAJA. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lance. And a warm welcome to everyone attending here in person and virtually as well. So there are 52 million Americans over the age of 65 today. What if I were to tell you that by 2050, that number will almost double to 90 million? Think about that for a moment. What does that mean for our society? How are we going to take care of these people? And what does it mean for our hospitality profession? I bet that that's not the first thought that comes to your mind when you wake up in the morning. But let's meet someone who is consumed by this every day. Katie Potter, President and CEO of Five Star Living. Katie, welcome to Shaw.
Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you all.
You have a very impressive background in government and politics. You have a degree, a JD, and you have a Master of Laws from a very fine institution, Boston University. Before that, you went to University of Maryland for your undergraduate degree, and you majored in government and politics. So I'm just curious, how did as a high schooler, you thought about, and what interested you in this major?
So I think growing up, I was sort of a history buff. I was into that. I read a lot. I was a little probably nerdy as a kid. And it was just something that was very interesting to me, particularly, the way the government worked, how legislation would be created, how that turned into policy, and then how that impacted the way we live. And so I think for me, going to college, going to Maryland, I wanted to be close to DC to have opportunities in that area. And that's really what drove my interest.
So when you were in college, did you do any internships? Did you get any experience working in the government or any kind of related?
I did. My first internship was for Congressman Bill Archer from Texas. At the time, he was the head of the Ways and Means Committee. So I learned a lot about how things got paid for in government. And I really enjoyed my time there. I think I probably learned a lot about the inner workings of how legislation's created, the compromise that must go into it, generally speaking, maybe not in today's politics, but generally speaking. And just I think learned a lot about overall how government works, what are the different interests that go into that. I did that between my sophomore and junior year. And then after my junior year, I interned for the Bush campaign this was the 2000 campaign. And then from there, I also worked for a governor's race in Maryland. So I did a lot of political work, and I really thought that was going to be my future. I really was interested in running campaigns. I know you're thinking, how does that translate to senior living? But we'll get to that later. I really thought that was going to be my work. And that's really also what led me to law school.
So during the time that you're doing these internships, there must be something in those internships that prompted you to say, okay, I'm going to now, right after this, go to law school. So what was that experience like in those internships that prompted you to that, sort of another degree?
Well, I think that, again, I always had that interest in government and the law. And so it felt like a natural to me. Even in high school, I think long-term, I knew I would go to law school. But certainly my experience in the government and in the political world, I also felt as though a law degree was an asset in the political world and for the work that I wanted to do, both legally and politically. And I think, generally speaking, a law school education is of value, even if you don't want to be a lawyer, which many people who go to law school don't. But overall, it teaches you different things, how to think critically, how to write well and speak well. So I think overall, I knew that was a good step for me in terms of the next phases of my career.
While many people don't want to do practice law, but you did want to practice because you joined Pan Am Railways. And so how was that? What did you do in that as a corporate counsel? And was there anything related to government and politics, sort of mixing the two interests that you had?
So it was interesting. As I moved through law school, I think I ultimately realized that I didn't want to be in the political world. I think I had learned a lot about sort of how the sausage is made. And, it's a challenge and you have to be very committed to that work. And I had a professor in law school, Professor Day. He oversaw the corporate counsel certification. And we talked a lot about like having an interest in business and how could I apply that interest in government into business. And so we started thinking about ways of what were regulated industries where the two sort of came together. And the railway industry is highly regulated. It's primarily by the federal government. So it was an opportunity to go in-house and work in a business, which I was interested in, but also leverage some of my, the learnings I'd had along the way in the political world.
So a lot of lawyers, when they finish law school, they go join law firms and then they go into corporate. And you took the opposite direction. So after a few years with this company, you moved to a law firm. So what was that transition? What did you sort of hope to gain from that transition?
Well, I found that I was really interested in the business side of law and more sort of a corporate focus. So as I looked at other opportunities within the in-house world, a lot of them really are looking for law firm experience. So I decided I would have to go back to a law firm. And I did. I went to work for Sullivan & Worcester here in Boston and had a wonderful experience. I learned so much. I met a lot of really wonderful people, had great clients, of which 5-Star was one of them. And so all in all, I never thought I would end up in a big law firm. It turned out to be a great experience for me.
So you alluded to the fact that 5-Star Senior Living was one of your clients. So
yes.
I guess that was your exposure to real estate because, going from heavily regulated industry and then working in this law firm, and then you moved to RMR, which is a real. So how did that, transition happen?
So at Sullivan & Worcester, I, started working in the corporate department and doing various different kinds of work, M&A work, contract work, securities work. And the RMR Group, which is an alternative asset management company, is a client of the firm. And so I started working on that client. RMR has 6 publicly traded REITs and 3 operating companies. 5-Star is one of them. 2 of them are public, 5-Star and Travel Centers of America. The 3rd company is Sonesta Hotels. And so just had a huge exposure just by virtue of working on this client, both to real estate in the form of REITs, but also some, operational and regulatory work with 5-Star and with other of the operating companies. So RMR is a great exposure to all different kinds of businesses, all different kinds of perspectives. So it was an education in itself for me, just working for this client.
So you have a lot of interest and you developed a lot of interest in real estate. And so what about real estate interested you at that point?
Well, I think, my focus in the real estate world was more in the corporate side. And at that time, the REITs in particular were very active in M&A. And so that was where my heart was. I'm really a transaction junkie by heart. And so we worked on a lot of deals in my time there and associated securities and financing offerings related to those deals. And that was, again, sort of what drew me to them. They were very active in the markets. They were doing interesting things, acquiring different kinds of companies, started to help you think about what the strategy was in terms of the purpose of acquisitions and how you bring them into a business. But of course, when you're a lawyer at a law firm, you work on the deal, and then the day that it closes, you move on to the next thing. You don't ever get to experience what it's like to transition it, what it means operationally. And so that was something that I think I was looking for.
Katie, one of the things we tell the students is that the rise to the top is never a linear progression.
No.
So, and you are, of course, a proof of that. And so, but when you look back, you can connect the dots and say, this is what I gained from that job or that degree. And so can you sort of provide a little bit of a overarching narrative to how you have gone through this journey?
Sure. I mean, I think, I know a lot of people say this, but it is a lot of luck in terms of being in the right place at the right time. I think, something that was instilled in me from a very early age was a work ethic and a grit to sort of just persevere through challenges, try to understand how to solve problems, and not be afraid to to make the commitment to work through something. And I think, bits and pieces of that shaped me along the way through those different experiences in different ways. But fundamentally, for me, at least, I felt like hard work is a core component. When I bring on new teams or meet new teams, they always ask me, what am I like as a leader? And I always say, preparation, hard work, and sort of a human centricity that people have to have in order to work well with me. But certainly, over the years, I think like I say, it's just luck, opportunity. It's about being in a moment and taking a chance to talk to somebody or to work on a project that maybe makes you feel very uncomfortable, but will help you learn. So just being cognizant of those moments along your journey, I think, is really important.
I love that. Hard work, preparation, and human centricity. I think that kind of defines what our student body is as well. So you mentioned in between that that there is sometimes element of luck and hard work. So when students are looking at their job opportunities, I frequently find that many students will say, this is exactly what I want to do. And so how do you sort of at the point where you are accepting jobs or you are thinking about transitioning to something else, what has to go into the decision makes to, sort of take an opportunity which you might not have been thinking?
I mean, I think you have to be very open, generally speaking, and understand what's important to you. Actually, when I was at the law firm, I grew up as an athlete. I played many sports growing up. It's also something that I think that's really shaped me. And so for a long time as a lawyer, I thought I would get into sports and even started to develop a client base in that area. But then again, other opportunities presented themselves and pushed me in a different direction. And even though it's senior living or real estate was something I never thought I wanted, it's been a great journey for me. And I'm so appreciative for having that opportunity. And I'm glad I wasn't afraid to take the step and go in that direction, even though at the time it's not really what I thought I wanted. So like I said, opportunities will present themselves to you along the way, and some you'll rightly turn away, but it's always good to be open and listen to them and understand them and then make a decision and not just say, well, that's not really what I want to do, because you'd be surprised at the things that can happen and become available to you as a result of that.
I think that's such a critical lesson, to have an open mind to all the opportunities that you have in front. And I think that's one of the issues that the students in our school have. They have so many different opportunities. And many times I find students are just kind of almost paralyzed with, okay, which of these 5 opportunities I'm going to take? So having an open mind is very important. So you are at this law firm, and obviously RMR is a client and 5-star is a client. So then how did you move to RMR?
So I really started my journey at 5-Star. They had a general counsel opening, and I remember the CEO, the then CEO, my prior boss, Bruce Mackey, called me and said, would you be ever interested? We've worked a lot together. Would you be interested in coming to 5-Star? And I remember being like, well, I'm not a healthcare lawyer. I'm a corporate lawyer. I don't do that work. And he said to me, you're smart. You'll figure it out. And he's like, I'm not worried about that. And so I was like, okay. I mean, I definitely wanted to make the transition to business. I know this company reasonably well. And so, yeah, why not? And I did and moved in, and it's been a great decision, obviously.
So then how long were you the corporate counsel or the lawyer for the company before
So I was,
the role?
yeah, I was general counsel for about 7 years, through a multitude of different, situations at the company, and then elevated to CEO in January of 2019. And of course, at that time, the company was in some financial difficulty. We had the quarter prior to me being appointed as CEO had announced that we'd had a going concern, or the challenges with our liquidity. So the first task that myself and the new management team got to was really addressing that financial challenge, which really amounted to the primary way senior living communities are operated. It traditionally had been through a lease structure. So we leased over 170 communities from a real estate investment trust, who's also part of the RMR group, Diversified Healthcare Trust. And we went to the task of sort of restructuring our agreements with the REIT. We did that in 2019, converted from an operator via lease structure to a manager, which is a little bit different. And then by doing that, address the liquidity problem and started to move forward in terms of transforming the business operationally and otherwise. And of course, we're having a great Q1 of 2020, and then COVID hits in March, the third week of March. And I sort of remember the day where I was when things sort of got shut down, and we were, shepherded out of the office, things were closing. And I remember in the early days counting COVID counts in the communities in a spreadsheet, because we didn't know, how big this was going to become. And we really approached COVID, interestingly, at first, as a senior living organization, particularly at the time we had skilled nursing facilities, we felt very confident in our ability around infection control and maintaining that. And so we were like, well, COVID is just another neurovirus, or it's the flu, and we know how to address that. And of course, it turned out to be much broader and bigger than anybody could have ever imagined, and particularly impacted our residents and our industry overall. So, COVID has been an interesting time.
So a big part of your career as CEO so far has been defined by COVID.
Yes.
But I'm very curious to sort of, and this is a very interesting way to think about it. Okay, I'm going to offer you the job of the CEO, a job that may not exist in the next few months or a year, because we have the going concern and we might be. So at that point, how do you accept a job which is on the verge of almost being eliminated? Do you see that as a challenge?
I did. I mean, I think, like I said, I'd been there for 7 years. I'd observed a lot of things happen, and I really just believed in the people we had in the organization. I was fortunate as general counsel to have spent time in the communities, gotten to know our team members, gotten to know our residents. And so when the job was presented to me, it really didn't feel like an option to say no. I just saw all the opportunities and all the growth that we could have. Again, just the fabulous people that we have that work with our residents on a day-to-day basis. And I just knew with that commitment, anything was possible. I knew there would be difficulties along the way, maybe not COVID-like difficulties, but yeah, it didn't feel like an option. It just felt like the next logical step.
So you did have about a little over a year to stabilize before COVID hit. And so can you talk about how you managed and transitioned through the COVID times? Well, we're not out of it yet, but what was your approach? How did you want to take care of the staff as well as the residents?
Well, I think as we started to understand a little better what COVID was really going to mean for our business and the industry overall, and perhaps the whole economy, we just, every day we said, if not, we would just focus on the health and safety of our residents and our team members. And that meant a huge investment in PPE and in testing. We were one of the only providers that provided time off for testing and COVID cases early on. we just made a huge commitment that the health and safety of our residents and team members was going to be our guiding post throughout the whole thing. And that's really what we focused on every day, making sure that we were as safe, as clean, as up to date in terms of the regulatory environment, which it was so interesting throughout COVID. You had the CDC and CMS on the SNF side, but also every state, every locality had their own set of regulations. And when you operate in 30 states, it can be a challenge. So that was also something we were very focused on a day-to-day basis, just making sure we were, in line with where we needed to be, cooperating with all the regulatory authorities that were involved. And because I'm sure you all remember, there was quite a focus on the older adult population throughout the COVID timeframe.
What a challenging time while you are restructuring and trying to get the company to a path for profitability,
Yes.
and then you are battling COVID and loss of residents and just very tough times.
Yes. Yeah. But as I say, in those days, I couldn't do in-person tours at the communities. So we were doing virtual tours. And I had a chance to really get in and see the communities, everyone, full PPE, just like hospitals. And I have to say, people still came to work. As I said, these team members still came to work every day to care for our residents, even sometimes at the expense of their own families. So you're inspired by that. How can't you be? And so that's sort of what keeps you going, kept us all going throughout that time period.
A few minutes ago, you started talking about real estate, and we have a concentration in real estate at the undergraduate level as well as a graduate level. So can you sort of talk a little bit about the nexus between real estate and senior living, and how are those two opportunities intertwined?
Sure. I think it's probably similar to a lot of other real estate classes. I don't think people necessarily think about it in terms of office or industrial, but it is its own class. It's grown quite a bit since I've been involved in senior living. I remember when I first started working with 5-Star, there was probably a handful of REITs or other investment vehicles that invested in the senior living space. That has grown exponentially. I think everyone has seen the opportunity and the demographics and the size of the boomer population and the needs that are going to be there. And so there's been a lot of investment in the space, which has been great. There's also been a lot of development in the space, which has created a lot of supply. Again, I remember when 5-Star might have been the only senior living community in a 100-mile radius, where today there's probably 8 of them. So there's been a lot of investment, which has been good. It's really upped the game of terms of not only the facilities portion of it, but what the experiential offering you have in the community. And it's also, I think, pushed the industry to innovate and be different in terms of their product offering. So I think the real estate focus and the investment community that's been brought in as a result of that has helped the senior living industry and will continue to do that going forward.
So Katie, you are a lawyer by training, education, and profession. So I'm going to ask you to make a case. So when people think of hospitality, they think hotels and restaurants.
Yeah.
Whereas at Shaw, we think that senior living is also part of hospitality. So who better than you to make the case? Is senior living a form of hospitality?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people think of it in the clinical component of senior living. And honestly, that's just the table stakes part of it. What we really focus on every day is creating experiences in our communities. And we're fortunate that we have our residents for longer periods of time than maybe you do in a hotel or in a restaurant. So we had the time to really develop that relationship. But it also means you have to be different and interesting every single day in terms of the activity and the programming that you're providing, the dining experience that you're providing. You have to think, when you live in a senior living community, you eat in the same restaurant 3 times a day, every day. So it's really difficult on our food and beverage teams to make that experience new and different every single day. And so that's why I think it's really more hospitality. As I say, there is a clinical component to what we do, but it's sort of just accepted that has to be excellent. And everything else is really how we differentiate each other from each other.
As judge and jury, I declare her the winner. Hospitality, senior living, senior living is part of our world.
Yeah.
So and I alluded to this earlier in my opening comment, but baby boomers have historically been the largest demographic segment. in the United States. And they've had an oversized impact on pretty much all aspects of our life, decade after decade. And they're growing in number, and the baby boomers are the ones that are aging and are now the biggest customers for all aspects of senior living. So whether it is independent living, assisted living, memory care, or nursing home care. And so they have a sense of place and how they want to live and spend their life and work and live and so forth. So how do you create an experience and an environment for this rising demographic, and how do you meet their quality of life expectations?
I think it's a question that the industry itself is sort of considering and thinking through today. I know one of the things we have done at 5-Star is really spent a lot of time trying to understand this new customer. And this boomer customer is quite different than the silent generation who we serve today. The silent generation, at least my grandparents, they were involved in groups, church groups, Kiwanis groups, that social interaction was very important to them. Community was very important to them. The boomer has a much different take. They're much more individualistic. They want more curated and experienced types situations. And so how do we evolve senior living to provide, it's a different value proposition than what we've provided before. And so in our view, it's really coming down to not trying to be a one size fits all. Like today, the way, as I'm sure some of you are aware, assisted living is sort of a package deal. You get all these great things for one monthly price. And one way that we have been looking at it is how do you disaggregate that to give them the choice they want? You also happen to be financially flexible that way. So for boomers that maybe didn't save the way their parents did, it gives them some more options, but choice is so incredibly important to them that we believe that that's going to be a way we can draw them to senior living. They have a lot, it's a more independent lifestyle, but also an opportunity to reach people outside of senior living, because the reality is the boomer demographic really don't want to move into senior living facilities. I mean, I don't think I'm giving away the secret here. And so how do you engage with them earlier in their aging process? Because just about, I think by the 2036, there'll be more people over the age of 65 than there will be people under the age of 18. And generally speaking, people over the age of 65 have 1 to 2 medical conditions that require assistance. And so how do you grapple that with people wanting to stay home and not move into a community setting, as wonderful as a community setting is? So our view is you have to engage with them earlier, provide them opportunities to engage with the services that you offer, whether it's in the community or as an extension of the community, and start that trusted partnership earlier so that when they are maybe a little bit later in life ready to move into a community, because independence just isn't possible anymore, whether because of physical challenges or mental challenges, you already have that relationship and you have an understanding of what's important to them in terms of how they want to live their life. And we think, this is a real opportunity to sort of transform the narrative around aging. It's really something that people look to dread, and we want to change the way people think about aging. It should be something you look forward to. I mean, I know I personally look forward to the day I can retire and do all the things that I don't have time to do today, or you continue to do the work that you love. And that's really what the aging process and the aging, that part of your life should be about. And so how do we enable and support that as people move through the aging journey?
So you mentioned the narrative, and you have the silent generation, and the narrative at that time was, this is not a good place to end up in. You only end up in, and that's the worst case scenario. And you talked about changing the narrative, and the question is, how do you change the narrative? I know that you provide all of these facilities. So, checking into a senior living facility is checking into a long-term stay hotel. So you have room service. If you want, you can get it. But how do you change the hearts and minds of people that this is actually not your grandparents'
senior living? Yeah. I mean, again, I think engagement earlier on in the process is important so that we show that we understand it's not as an abrupt of a transition. And we certainly understand and want to empower and be a part of them living their best life. I think that's important. And I also think it's showing people, we have the great advantage of social media and things like that today. So we have so many opportunities to connect with older adults. And And by the way, they are online and we get more interest through our website than any other way. So they are online, they do engage digitally. And so making sure that you can show and explain them through that medium, what the lifestyle is like, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge challenge going forward. So in the last few decades, the lifespan of Americans has been increasing, and it's much longer than what it was earlier. And there's another related concept called health span, which is the amount of time in your senior years, towards the end of your life, that you're healthy and able to live independently. And so how have these two concepts changed things in the senior living industry?
Well, I think, we certainly focus on, the lifespan, because again, our goal is to meet you where you are. So whether, again, you have physical or mental challenges, how can we support you? What are the services we can offer to allow you to live your best life, no matter what your condition might be? And I think that's critically important as people age. They need to feel an empowerment through service, not necessarily I need services in order to just, get through the day to day. There should be, again, this is sort of like flipping the switch on the conversation, which is how do I leverage this support or this empowerment in order to continue to live the life I want to live, as opposed to I am being forced into a situation to accept this care. And so, that's a switch that we hope to show people will make the lifespan as good as the health span.
So you mentioned that that you want to reach out to people earlier. So can you expand on that a little bit? How do you reach to people, and what programming do you have in place for people who are not yet ready to come into senior living facility?
I think a great example of that is our Ageility products. Okay. We have a outpatient rehabilitation through our Ageility line of business. It really started as a complement to our senior living services in our communities. It was great for residents. They could just come downstairs, do the rehab that they needed, and not have to go anywhere, not have to leave the community. And through that, we learned that there is a desire for people who want a rehab situation that's focused on the older adult body. So we found ways to pull people into the community through our rehab offering. And then from there, we extended it. We created a fitness offering that focuses on older adults based on the clinical excellence in our rehab product, but also, a private pay model that can help people, not only extension as rehab, but also if you're a golfer, it could be sport focused, it could be just wellness focused. And so through services like that, we've learned a lot about how we might be able to draw people into the community, or potentially, we're not there yet, but potentially exit the community to meet them where they are.
So you mentioned golf, and so a lot of boomers play golf. So this is a good transition for helping them understand what the senior living community is. So during this period where you're trying to change the narrative, I'm sure you have some family members who are in a situation where they might need some help as they're aging. So what do they think of senior living, and are they on board with your plan for all of us to live in senior living communities?
So I was sharing with everyone that I've just moved my mom to the Boston area in December, and she lives in her own apartment independently. But she has said to me, if you ever move me into a senior living community, like, that's it, we're never speaking again. And so I consider her my biggest critic, but also my learning opportunity. She has become my one-person focus group for lots of ideas, as well as my dad. And so I feel like for me, it's the challenge, that I get great feedback from both of them in terms of how they live their best life, how we can help and recreate that in a community, or support that in their home eventually someday. So it's true. I think there is a stigma that we have to start sharing, sort of turning it around and talking about it differently. But I appreciate their constructive and critical feedback, because it really does, fuel and help us think through a lot of the decisions at the company.
So have you taken them to some of your communities?
Yes, actually, when I first became general counsel, my dad lives out in the Midwest in the Kansas City area, and he went and toured communities with me, and we went separately. So he would tour as a prospective resident, and I toured as an employee, obviously. And it's just interesting to get that perspective. So it was fun.
Interesting. So a couple of follow-ups on this. One is, if the American population is aging, so is the world's population.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know if you are thinking of expanding in other countries.
Yes, I mean, I think with the COVID pandemic, you've seen companies that have been in international have pulled back because of, I think, just restrictions on the business. But I definitely see a huge opportunity internationally. I mean, senior living is a really wonderful product. And I think certainly in other countries, I think the challenge is for US companies is to make sure we understand the regulatory environment, because obviously very different in other countries and really may change the business model for how you approach senior care. But yes, I think it's definitely an opportunity for senior living going forward.
So many countries are actually more advanced than the United States in taking care of their seniors. So
Yeah.
recently I heard about South Korea has a very advanced infrastructure. I know France has an amazing infrastructure as well. So do you sometimes borrow ideas from other places to sort of implement in the US?
Sure. I mean, as I said, we do a lot of market research to understand, what people are doing well and what maybe not be working. And so we're always open to new and different ideas. There's obviously cultural differences that have to be taken into account, but yes, certainly open. Again, this is an evolving space and it has to innovate and change. And so anywhere you can pull inspiration from is helpful.
A lot of us who are strong believers in technology, as I am, we think that automation and robotics are going to be a huge force in the future. Do you ever worry that that's going to be, if we all have robots at home helping us, that's going to replace the senior living communities?
No, I actually, I'm really open to technology. I think fundamentally people crave a personal connection. And so you're never going to lose, I think, the one-on-one of a caregiver. But there are ways to use technology to help. There's a lot of innovation right now in senior living around the smart apartment in terms of being able to assess people's fall risk and their vital signs and things like that. So you don't have to physically have a caregiver going in all the time and leveraging that data. But I think if you sat and you talked to some of our residents, they would tell you the caregivers are what makes their day a lot of times in the community. So there is still a huge space for human connection in this business, but I think it can be complemented by technology only to improve it. So I, like you, embrace technology, especially in senior living. I think we have to figure out how to use it the right way, balance it appropriately with that human connection.
That's perfect. How can I argue with human interactions? And we talk about that at our school all the time, the human connection with people. That's part of our industry. So technology can enhance and facilitate, but not replace. Fantastic. So now we all want to get to know you a little bit more. So can you talk about where did you grow up?
Sure. I grew up in upstate New York, just outside of the capital, Albany. I grew up in a city called Schenectady, New York. I spent my entire childhood there. My dad worked for GE there. My mom worked at Union College, a small liberal arts school there. And, it was a great place to grow up. But when I was 18, it was all I wanted to do was to get out. Looking back on it now, it was a great childhood. But yeah, and I have two older sisters. One is coaches track and field at Ithaca College, also in upstate New York. And my other sister is a nurse at one of the high schools in upstate New York. And so, it was great. It was like all girls and my dad.
So GE recently announced they're splitting in 3. And so
yes.
Does your dad ever wonder which entity will provide his pension now?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's been interesting to watch that journey of that company. I mean, again, when I grew up, GE, especially in our town, was the place that you worked. I mean, and so to see the way it's evolved and changed in these recent years, and now the split is fascinating to just see how that company has changed.
So what was the conversations around the dinner table when you were growing up?
I would say we talked a lot about sports. Both my parents were athletes. And so that was instilled very early on for us. So we started playing sports at a very young age, probably at 5. And I think my parents felt like that, first of all, making that commitment to a team was a really good lesson, but also learning teamwork generally. And I always say, those are lessons I still bring with me today. I used to be on the board of a not-for-profit called Good Sports here in Boston, and they provide sporting equipment to underprivileged youth in programs, in team sports programs. And it was a great experience for me because it was a good reminder of all those lessons that you learn from being on a team and being involved in sports. My dad to this day reads like several newspapers a day. And so there was always a good discussion about current events and business and things like that at the dinner table. And I still to this day read an actual paper. I still haven't made the shift to digital. I miss touching the paper, although I'm getting better just because it's easier to do it online. But yeah, I think overall, we talked a lot about those types of things. I think just to inform, as kids, we became well-rounded children, I think, because of those discussions.
So you mentioned that you were active in sports. So what kind of sports did you play, and any other hobbies and interests you had?
I played soccer, basketball, and lacrosse. Basketball was sort of my bigger sport, my height. And I loved it. I had hoped to play. I could have played in college at probably not a Division I level, but at a Division II or Division III level. But I continued to play until I was out of law school, pretty much. And I still enjoy watching college basketball very much. But I think, in addition to that, today it's more, I still enjoy sports. I'm a Boston fan, Red Sox, Bruins, Patriots. So I go to a lot of games. And I think that's a big part of my hobbies. I miss playing a little bit, but there's just not a lot of time for that when you get older. I do love to travel. I've been a lot of different places. Cape Town is probably my favorite vacation spot. Very cool place. I also think travel is really important. I studied abroad when I was in college, and I always felt like that was some of the best lessons learned I've had in my life. I'm a sort of an advocate. I probably shouldn't say this out loud. I really think every college student should travel abroad. I just think it created a huge amount of perspective for me. Going somewhere else, seeing how other people live. And when I travel for pleasure now, that's the part I enjoy. Like I don't necessarily go to see sites. I like to go sit in a cafe or in a bookstore and really understand how people live there, because I think that's how you learn and grow. So I remember one time at a Christmas, I was home and my uncle was like, so you're going to, at the time, he's like, you're going to Colombia on vacation? And I was like, yeah, I'm just sort of interested. And he's like, why not go to like Florida? And I'm like, well, I'm not sure I learn anything going to Florida, but it's as nice as it is. So yeah, I like to go to different and interesting places.
So where did you go to for your study abroad?
I went to London because I was a little bit of a chicken about the language barrier, but I did travel all around Europe as a result of being centrally located in London.
So I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment here. We have a lot of students here. So among the students that are here, many of them are international students. So
Excellent.
Coming to the US is an international experience for them.
Sure.
So including that, all the students, raise your hand if you have had a study abroad experience or you are planning to have one while in college.
That's pretty good.
So it's pretty much most of our students either go abroad or they come here. So
good. You'll be glad you did.
So what is an important value as a professional, and what values do you try to inspire in your team as a leader?
As I said, I think there's a few things that are important to me, kind of a work ethic and what I call grit, a little bit of grit. Again, that human centricity, it's always important at the end of the day to be human. When you manage people, you come to realize that what might be happening to you that day they may have something totally different going on. So you always have to remember what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. It's really important. And help that guide you, and how you manage and relate to people is really important. I think of it, I call it exploration, but sort of like learning, as I say, always be listening and learning. I think that even, I think a lot of leaders sometimes get lost in, that they don't have anything to learn necessarily from people, even frontline team members. And I'll tell you, when I go visit communities, I spend the most time with frontline team members because I learn the most from them, not only about what's going on in the community, what's working and what's not working, but also just generally about the residents, how they're doing. I'm telling you, there's a wealth of knowledge in people if they engage with your customer on a day-to-day basis. So whatever hospitality business you might pursue, my biggest advice would be to spend time with your frontline team members, because as a leader, the feedback they can give you not only about their experience as a team member, but about your customer's experience is incredibly valuable.
You know, I was going to ask a direct question as to what advice you have for students, but your conversation through has been filled with so many interesting pieces of advice, and I hope, you know, I see a lot of students taking notes. And so is there anything you want to tell the students at this point other than what you've already said?
You know, I think over my career, one thing I've learned, early on, you're sort of, especially when you become a leader and you start managing people or you manage a department, you often try to think about like, who are the leader they expect me to be, or what are they, you know, what is my manager? Because even when you're CEO, you still have a manager and people that you report to. You know, what do they expect of me? And I think as you get a little more experience and you work in different situations, the most important thing is to be yourself and let that really shine through, because people know it when you're trying to be something that you're not. And so that authenticity as a leader, I think, is incredibly important. So always lead with your heart, particularly in the hospitality business, because I think, again, customers and team members really feel and understand that, and it'll make you a better leader.
That's very good advice. Katie, so we are towards the end of the program, so I have a few fun questions for you.
Okay.
So tell us your favorite vacation destination other than Colombia and London.
I would say Cape Town, South Africa.
Cape Town, South Africa.
Yeah.
Okay. Where would you like to travel but have not yet traveled?
Oh, so many places. New Zealand, Sri Lanka, India, we talked about. So many. South America, a lot of places I haven't been yet.
That you're going to plan.
Yes.
Okay. So, do you have a favorite band?
A favorite band? Well, my oldest sister is quite a bit older than me. She's 13 years older than me because my mother was married prior to my dad. And so she was very into like 70s bands. So growing up, I mean, I was tied to her at the hip. So imagine this poor woman, 18 years old, and here's your 5-year-old younger sister, like literally waiting for you to get off the bus every day. Like I loved her and I wanted to be with her all the time. So I think I'm partial to 70s music because that's what we used to listen to when she would tolerate me and hang out with me. And so I would say overall 70s music, maybe the Eagles is a winner out of there, but yeah.
You mentioned earlier on that you follow pretty much most of the sports teams in Boston.
Yes.
So if you had to pick one, which would be your favorite?
I have to say the Celtics because my dad is a big Celtics fan. And so we grew up, even though I grew up in New York, we grew up watching a lot of Celtics basketball. And those were the 80s teams that were really good. The Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish teams. So I would have to say the Celtics.
And I'm surprised that New York Knicks was not his favorite when growing up.
No, well, my dad actually grew up in Massachusetts in the western part of the state. So we were all Boston sports all the time. And I feel like upstate New York, for those of us who are from upstate or from Connecticut, you can really go either way. You should lean toward Boston, but that's okay.
Good choice. Have you been watching any TV series or movie recently?
So I've been watching, it's funny, I asked this question of a group of team members. We had a Thanksgiving event this week at work, and I was talking to them like, oh, do you guys have Hulu? And they all looked at me and they're like, well, of course we do. And I'm like, oh, well, I just got Hulu, and I've been watching this series called Dope Sick. And it's fascinating. It's all about the marketing and the selling of OxyContin when Purdue Pharmaceuticals started selling it, and sort of the impact it's had on communities, and what is the responsibility of pharma in terms of their advertising and things. And it's not a documentary, it's a story. So I'm sure there's a lot of liberties in terms of making it, compelling, but I've just found it very interesting, especially when you're in sort of the quasi healthcare space. And we see often every day sort of what the wonderful and also challenging things that pharmaceuticals can create in the healthcare system. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's very interesting. I think thought-provoking.
Need to get Hulu for that.
Yeah.
Any book recommendation?
Yes. So if you're really interested in senior living, I recommend this book called The Longevity Economy. It's all about, and we're laughing because it's written by a wonderful gentleman, Joe Coughlin, who is the director of the university, or the Age Lab at the university across the river, MIT. But it's a really great book. I think it gives a lot of really good perspective on the older adult population and sort of what they're seeking and looking for in terms of how they age. And so if you're in business and you're developing products or services, it's a very interesting insight into how you should be thinking about developing those products and services. I think traditionally, you know, we have created products that are, you know, sort of specific to the older adult. You know, everyone knows the life alert, right? You know, I've fallen and I can't get up. And you have to ask yourself, is that a product that you or I would want to wear? And of course we would say no. And so you have to say, why then would an older adult want to wear that? Because really they want to be integrated. They want to feel a part of, you know, what everyone else is doing. And so you can't market it for the result. You have to market it for the customer. And again, back to this customer centricity, particularly with this population. So it's probably why, you know, the Apple Watch is going to be the new life alert. Because everybody wears them and there's so much opportunity to track and understand. But as you think about service and product offering, the book really talks about how you should be thinking about all the things that you want to do or how you would want to be treated in that situation. And I think it's a very interesting perspective on how to serve the population.
So I have a fill in the blank question. So this is a quiz here. It's not so bad to mature or advance in age because you can
travel.
And you don't have to
work anymore. Which is probably not entirely true.
Katie, that was really a very fun and interesting experience. Thank you so much for coming to our school. I really enjoyed it. So let's give her a round of applause.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to hand it over to Professor Lance for some closing comments.
Katie, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And as someone who's on the boomer cusp of Gen X, I listened to this very, very astutely because I'm not that far away. And truthfully, I have a millennial mindset. And so my expectations for choice are very much prominent in where I'd like to see. So I love the transformative perception and concept. And 5-Star Senior Living's branding exec, Cindy Hale, was one of our summer conversation series panelists a few months ago. She was phenomenal in explaining sort of the rebranding and repositioning of where 5-Star is taking this transformation. And if you look at this as living in an all-inclusive and having the data to monitor you to take care of your health, that's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about what the prospects are for the future of this business. So I hope you all took that away from this too. And if you have questions about where we're going in our programming, please come see me at any time so I can help answer those questions about the courses, the curriculum that we have here for the concentration to help support the industry and have the industry support what we're doing too. Very, very thrilled about that. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you all so much.